Well, good afternoon, everybody. That's a little high. It is so great to see this many people that are interested in Intune. It's wonderful. And welcome to building out a successful Microsoft Intune pilot. I'm Jeff Bowler. I'm a Principal Program Manager in the Enterprise Client Mobility team. And with me today?
My name is Eric Schroeder. I'm also a Program Manager on the Enterprise Client Mobility team.
Our goal through this session, we might be a little optimistic, is an hour and 15 minutes, show you the process that we normally go through in 3 days. So we're going to talk really fast, and hopefully everything will work. But I think it'll be a very good session for you. We work with organizations all over the world. We're part of Intune Engineering, but they do let us out to talk to customers, which is actually the favorite part of our job. And when we're out there, we get a lot of insight from customers, and we learn a lot of things. And we're hoping, as we go through this end-to-end process, we can share some of those tips for you. Our agenda today will do a very, very brief overview of Microsoft Intune, because I have been in the booth, and I do know that there are some folks out there that may not know what Microsoft Intune is and the capabilities. So we'll run through that very quickly. And then we'll get into planning for an Intune pilot. I'll talk about some of the topics that we discuss with customers that are important for you, if you haven't, to really dig in and rationalize about. And those topics are important, not only that it's a process, but it really helps ensure that your pilot would be successful. Then we're going to have Eric. Eric is going to talk about Intune architecture. I think you call your section Demystifying Intune Architecture, right? And then we get into really the main part of the session, and it's deployment. So we'll talk about prerequisites at a high level. We do have links to prereqs within our PowerPoint, which you all would get. And then we'll talk about our onboarding itinerary that I talked about, the 3 days that kind of takes you from having nothing to ending in 3 days with something that you can do your test cases with and begin having users enroll within your organization. And then after that, we will focus in on a deployment walkthrough. So we'll focus on 5 areas, beginning with the provisioning area, setup, enrollment, the company portal. We'll get into the settings, the profiles, something that you probably never heard of, conditional access. Have you heard of conditional access? And then we'll talk about app delivery, MAM, and then once it is implemented into your environment, what about management? What about reporting? And a little bit about troubleshooting. Does that sound good? All right, excellent.
And one thing that I'll add to this is, we have a pretty large audience here, and I'm assuming it's a very diverse group of people. One thing that we want you guys to kind of take away from this is, this is not meant to be a prescriptive kind of Microsoft-only methodology of how to do an Intune proof of concept or how to do it in your environment. We know we have customers here. We know we have partners. We know we have, SIs or, integrators. So, looks like I cut out. Oh, I'm back. So we want you guys to know that this is the methodology that we've built and how we engage with customers and where we find the most success. But it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. We want you to take the best practices and some of the learnings that we've done and apply it to your own environment, whether you're building out your own POC, you're working with the customer, or you're working with another partner to do that. I mean, one thing I'd like to know is if I can kind of just get a straw poll of how many of you guys are running an MDM solution today, just by a show of hands. So it looks like a big population. And if I have to, I'll ask the same question. How many of you guys are running Intune in your environment today? That's good. So, we don't exactly get into it in the nitty-gritty of the details today, but, there's, moving from one solution to another, or even being able to do a POC within an existing environment where you may have a competitor MDM solution. We don't get too much into the details, but we'd be happy to, after the session, discuss how you can actually have an Intune proof of concept or pilot coexisting within your environment where you may already have an existing investment.
All right, great. We do have a lot of information to cover in a short period of time, so I'd like to ask if you could hold your questions to the end of the session. We promise that we will answer your questions. If we run out of time here, we'll be right outside in the hallway, and then for those of you that are online, we'll answer those through Yammer. All right. So let's go ahead and do a brief overview for Intune for those of you that it's new to. So Microsoft's enterprise mobility solution is Microsoft Intune. It does MDM, or mobile device management. It has mobile application management, or MAM. It also has the ability to manage PCs. And today we're really talking about the standalone solution. And so the standalone solution is managed through a web console. Microsoft's vision for enterprise mobility management is to enable organizations to help their users be productive on the devices that they love, the applications that they know, but at the same time ensuring that IT assets are secure. So I know that you're all faced with that balancing act, and our solution really is focused on helping you with that balancing act. And then Microsoft Intune can help you manage the entire life cycle, the device life cycle, from everything from enrollment to the provisioning pieces to the management and protection, and then also around retirement. So from an enrollment perspective, the way that users enroll into our service is through a self-service portal, or what we call company portal. It's a consistent company portal, self-service portal across devices, so it's a very consistent user interface. And then in addition, we have a custom terms and agreement. So this is something that we added within, I think, the last couple months. So that would be presented to the user before they enroll. We have other options around deployment for bulk enrollment. We have something called a service manager. So if you wanted to enroll a bunch of devices at one time, you could do that. And then we also are capable of doing bulk enrollment with iOS. So we have the ability to do configurator. We have the ability to do device enrollment program. So it provides some additional options for you. Prior to enrollment, though, and I know many of you that are doing BYOD in your organization, and matter of fact, I talk to customers all the time, and they say, Jeff, our biggest challenge to doing enterprise mobility management is really getting users to enroll in a BYOD environment. It's very difficult because they're like, what are we getting? Conditional access is the ability to restrict the user's access to corporate resources unless they are enrolled into the service and they have to be compliant. So many organizations are really happy about this capability and they're leveraging it. And today we'll actually show you from an admin perspective, how do you enable it, and then what that end user experience is. Once the device is enrolled, then the provisioning happens. And it's really transparent to the user for the most part. You have policy settings, device settings, security settings coming down. You have profiles to make it easier for the user to connect to corporate resources, Wi-Fi, VPN, email profiles. You also have the capability to deploy certificates. And we have the ability to deploy trusted certificates, SCEP certificates that would be used for client authentication. And then finally, we have the ability to do things like, as we mentioned, about deploying applications and having some control around those applications. Once you have the policies and the profiles and the applications and they flow down to the device and the user is using that device, then we have the ability for you to provide management. If a user's device gets jailbroken or rooted, we have the ability then to restrict them from gaining access to corporate resources because of that, through a compliance policy. We also do MAM, or a software policy. We align the software policy with the application at deployment time. So we're able to control cut, copy, paste, and save as, and those types of things. As a matter of fact, we actually, through a compliance policy, can determine whether or not that application will open. If that device is not compliant, that application won't even open. And then in addition, we have reporting. So we have some CAN reports that are online that you can run, you can print, you can export. Now, when it comes to a time when the user either leaves the company or the device is lost or stolen, then we have the ability to either reset the device, what we call a full wipe, a selective wipe, and be able to do reporting and tracking associated with that. So that was what is Microsoft Intune in about maybe 5 or 7 minutes, and that's really all we're going to focus in. So hopefully you saw MDM, MAM, PC management, what our vision is, and the fact that we kind of cover the life cycle. This life cycle, by the way, is what we're going to be covering during the deployment piece. So we not only will show you how do you configure it, but we'll show you examples of what it looks like. So let's talk a little bit about Intune planning. When we start working with organizations, we have some of these areas at a high level that we know in order for a pilot to be successful, we really need to talk through these. And many of us on our team, right, we spend hours with customers talking through that, whether they like it or not, right, for the most part.
I mean, and a lot of times too, these conversations surface things that the customer's not even thinking about, or surfacing conversations within their own organizations with other peer teams that they have to talk to in order to kind of get their buy-in, or get these guys on board, because some of this requires not just their core team to work on, but it could be the security team or the firewall team or the exchange team. So it gets people thinking, it gets the kind of collaboration going, and it gets them to understand that this is simply not just an Intune deployment, but there's some other prerequisites and some critical thinking that they have to do along with us to kind of make this successful.
And I actually see some of the customers that we've worked with in the audience, so I know they still like us after going through the process, which is nice. Goals and scope, every project, what are the goals? What is the scope? You think, hey, pretty easy. Many times we get engaged, they just want us to come out and implement. What's the goals? What's the scope? Where are we actually deploying this? Who's going to be enrolling? Those things are very important. The use cases, who are the folks that are actually going to be using the service? What services are you going to be providing? Very, very important. The saying that one shoe doesn't fit all, and we find it all the time. As a matter of fact, the education around our solution, many times organizations are kind of surprised. Oh, you can have more than one policy, and you can target more than one group, etc. So we really stress that, understanding your use case scenarios. What device platforms are going to be supported? This one is basically a no-brainer, but sometimes organizations have this feeling that, yes, we're doing BYOD, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every device is going to be able to be enrolled into our environment. So thinking a little bit about that, what are those devices? And some organizations even have different levels of service for BYOD, depending on the device that they have. The requirements and capabilities needed is totally aligned to the devices, and it's totally aligned to the use case scenarios. The use case scenarios with the devices, what are the requirements and capabilities that are associated with that? And then it is a cloud service, so you're like, lab, production, why does it matter? Well, we do ask organizations, do you want to have Intune in a lab environment? Is this all for testing, or are we going to actually implement that in production? And then the other element around lab and production is this. On-prem, Intune has the ability to integrate with on-prem infrastructure. So are we integrating into your lab, or are we integrating into production? So these are some of the things that are important. And then lastly, implementation resources. Eric talked about this. An enterprise mobility management solution touches a lot of different areas. Security, networking, the exchange team, you might have a client management team, etc. So having those people involved, not only for planning and deployment, but also for ongoing management and operations. And then what approach are you going to use? Are you going to start off with a proof of concept first? Are you then going to do a pilot? Is your pilot only going to include IT folks, and then you get to a larger group of IT folks? Or are you going to say, you know what? We're going to have a proof of concept and a very small pilot, and then we're going to start rolling out to business groups. I've worked with some organizations that have done an entire, and we're talking about lots of devices and users, their entire organization in 3 months. So it really depends on what your strategy is. And one other quick comment on this. If you have an existing enterprise mobility management solution, which a lot of you already do, and a lot of the companies that we work with already do, sometimes they think about, well, we'll continue to use our current solution for some use cases, but all the other new devices or particular use cases will move forward with Intune and then eventually transition into Intune over time. It's not like an all or nothing type of situation. So that's something to think a little bit about. All right. Thank you for allowing me to go through the planning slide. Now what we're going to do is move forward, and I'm going to have Eric talk about architecture.
Hey guys. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time to talk about the architecture of Intune. The architecture itself, we're going to be talking, so like as Jeff and myself discussed in the beginning, this is really a discussion around the standalone implementation, also known as the cloud, but we actually have two different deployment types. We have the standalone version and also the hybrid. Typically we see a lot of customers using the hybrid deployment if they have an existing system center config management deployment on site, they're doing systems management with that, software distribution, device management with their PCs. This, enabling Intune will now just enable MDM capability. So from within the config manager console, they'll have a single pane of glass management solution. They can still do everything they've done on their existing environment. Now they can actually manage devices and touch devices through the same console. So that's typically where the kind of differentiation is with when customers choose one over the other. But for the purpose of today's discussion, we're really going to stick to cloud. But at the end of the conversation, you guys have any questions on either or solution, we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you guys. And just to kind of give an overview, so these might, when we talk about architecture, it's not so much just the architecture of Intune, but it's also the architecture of the dependencies of Intune. I'll kind of advance the slide a little bit just to kind of give you guys an overview. Here is I mentioned the cloud, the standalone, and then the hybrid. You'll see here, this is a very simplistic view of the architecture where we have Intune living in the cloud, and it's talking either to other cloud resources or it's talking to your on-premise infrastructure. So this is really just to show kind of, just to compare and contrast the two. You'll see on one side it's cloud and devices and management of those devices, and then on the other side it's the on-premise config manager infrastructure. Where I really want to spend some time is really on the next slide.
Hey, Eric, could I just make a quick comment on this? This is a question that we get. Would you say this is probably one of the most common questions that we get about Intune? First of all, they don't understand that there's two deployment options. They say, oh, you have config man, you have Intune. Intune has two deployment options, like you said, right? Standalone, cloud only, and hybrid. They'll say, next, which one should I use? We have customers that already had Configuration Manager, and they love it, and they want to find a way to leverage that investment and continue with their expertise and everything that they do, and extend that into Intune to allow them to do mobile device management. And for a lot of customers, matter of fact, last year, probably most of our engagements were all hybrid.
Hybrid, yeah.
But we do have some customers that are saying, we're really wanting to get in the cloud. Our strategy is O365. We love Azure, and we really want to start moving into that direction. And maybe what we'll do is we'll continue to do config man for PC management, but we're going to go ahead and move to cloud only for our mobile devices. And so there really isn't any right answer to it. And then, of course, we have organizations that maybe are using an existing MDM solution on-prem, and they decide, you know what, we're just going to go with Intune cloud only and leverage that. So it really depends. It's something that you really want to think about, but it is important.
Yeah. And then to kind of build on what Jeff was saying, one of the reasons, that kind of, in terms of customers moving to Intune, one of the things that, if you're running your resources in the cloud, say if you're an Office 365 customer, you're an Azure AD customer, you have some of your assets and some of your corporate resources already living in the cloud, there's a much simpler on-ramp to kind of integrating and getting into and working with that stuff. So, there's the architecture diagram. You'll see it looks kind of like things are repeated both on-prem and in the cloud, just because in this, even though this is standalone, Intune running in the cloud, there is no config manager, running on site. You'll see that we can talk to hybrid. This is like a hybrid type deployment where we're talking to Office 365. It could be Exchange on-prem. You could have identity living in the cloud. So we're not dictating how you can run your back-end infrastructure. We can connect to everything. If it's in the cloud, there's just an ease of connect because Azure's running, Intune's running in Azure, Office 365 is running in Azure, so you can hook the tenants together. If you're running in an on-premise scenario, like the example, we have identity. So you can do ADFS, you can do single sign-on. Say if you don't want to replicate your identity to the cloud, we have something called DIR Sync or Azure Active Directory Sync. It's a synchronization engine that runs within your environment, and it pushes Active Directory objects like the user UPN to the cloud and does the synchronization. So when a user is logging into Intune, to the company portal, we can verify their identity. So if you don't want to push everything all to the cloud, you can still keep things on premise. Same thing for Exchange. We support Exchange O365 in the cloud. We support it on premise. There's something what we call connectors that are involved, and it actually connects your on-premise infrastructure to Intune, so we can actually manage it and talk to it. So we can, in the instance of conditional access, which Jeff will kind of get into a little bit later on, we can, enable and disable email access for users. That's how we can talk to Exchange. But if you're in the cloud, the tenants can talk directly to each other. So there's some pieces of infrastructure that are not necessary, or it's just a much easier deployment. Another thing kind of we'll get into, we call it SCEP. Now this is really our certificate management. So if you were doing certificates, and I think Jeff will spend a little bit more time later on, but this is one of the opportunities where we kind of can give you guys a tip and some of the things that we've seen working with customers. NDES is a separate role service within Windows Server. So if you wanted to manage certificates and provision either Wi-Fi certificates or mail certificates or VPN certificates to devices, you need to set up this separate piece of infrastructure. So, one thing that we run into with customers all the time is the SCEP server, there's a web front end to it, has to talk to devices. So devices request a certificate over this web front end. How do you expose that to the internet? And how does even Intune talk to the SCEP? So there's another connector. So we see sometimes with customers where they'll deploy SCEP and they'll get it running on their environment, but it can't talk to the internet. And they could be reverse proxy issues, firewall issues. So these are one of the instances where even though it may seem simple to kind of deploy and people just assume everything just works, you might have to involve other people. A lot of times we've done it on some customer sites where we're doing network packet capture to figure out, is it a proxy thing, is it a firewall thing? So these are just some things to kind of think about, that if you're doing an on-premise deployment, there are some things that have to talk to Intune, and being able to kind of plug holes through firewalls and get internet connectivity will be something that you guys have to think about. And all the stuff that we have is documented in our TechNote articles in terms of the destinations and the ports that the service is actually talking to. So it's not some, we're not going to say just open up the internet to Intune and let it do its thing. We have very prescriptive guidance on where it's going and what it's doing. This is an important kind of thing to understand, that for this thing, even though Intune is standalone, it's running in the cloud, and there is no on-premise config manager management console, and it's not connecting to your on-premise systems management, we can still connect to on-premise or cloud or a mixture of both resources. One of the common kind of trends that we're seeing a lot with customers today is they have an on-premise Exchange, or they have an on-premise Lotus Notes or some other mail system, and they're moving to Office 365. So we're talking to on-premise Exchange servers, we're talking to O365 servers, and then they're migrating users' mailboxes to the cloud and putting it under management and conditional access for Intune. So the important thing to understand is that we can work in both worlds, and we can work in both worlds rather easily, and we can actually give you an on-ramp to say, I want to leave some stuff in on-prem, I want to put some stuff in the cloud, and it just works that way.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. All right, so I know you're ready to talk about deployment. I don't think the switcher's ready, though.
I get stuck a little. Hey, Jeff, you want me to advance it?
Sure. Why don't you do that? Thank you.
We have the technology.
He's my switcher today. Okay.
Switcher.
So should I just look at you? And okay, that sounds good. There's 3 areas in deployment that we're going to cover off on. Prerequisites. We'll talk about prerequisites. High level, what these are. As I mentioned, we have details in our PowerPoint. On the itinerary that we use, the 3-dot itinerary, will show you that as a framework, and I think that might be beneficial to you. And then we'll get into the deployment walkthrough, as I mentioned before. So the main prerequisites with the standalone are really around certificates and keys that are related to enabling the devices that you're going to roll. Android and Windows Phone 8.1 and Windows 8.1, just to enroll and deploy settings and deploy deep link applications, you really don't need to do anything in order to be able to do that. Apple devices, though, require an Apple Push Notification Service certificate. And there's a very simple process, 3-step process within our management console. Eric will be showing you. It's very common to other MDM solutions. So really, the main prereq for Intune standalone is that top line. Now, if you are doing the side loading of applications into Windows Phone 8.1 or Windows 8.1, one of the requirements of a Windows Phone application or Windows application is a code signing certificate. So if you are doing that, or you're planning to do that, then you would get, for Windows Phone, a certificate from Symantec, a mobile certificate from Symantec, and there's a process to do that. And then for Windows 8.1, if you are doing a side loading, you would need the certificate for code signing the application, but in addition, you would need a side loading key, which you're all familiar with and probably been dealing with since Windows 8. Now, there are three other areas that are optional that Eric was talking about in the architecture. Most enterprise customers are doing some type of AD synchronization from on-prem to Azure AD, and so they have the Azure AD synchronization tool that is installed on a server and communicates with the domain, and then it also communicates with the cloud service. So that is a piece, that is a server or a VM and a process that you should plan for if that's what you're going to do. If you have on-prem Exchange, 210 SP1 as an example, and you're wanting to do conditional access against that environment, then you will require an Exchange connector. That also runs on a server or on a VM. So that is something to think about. And then from the standpoint of certificates, as Eric was talking about, we have the ability to deploy trusted certificates, in other words, root or intermediate certificates, just within a profile. But for SCIP certificates that are used for client auth, for Wi-Fi or VPN or email, we utilize that SCIP infrastructure, the NDIS role, the Network Device Enrollment Service. So that's a role, a server role that you install on Windows Server 2012 R2. You also have an Intune component that we call the NDIS connector that gets installed. In a lot of these implementations, we would use a reverse proxy, like WAP as an example. So they're not required, those last three, but sometimes they're utilized. So we just wanted to be upfront with you.
Hey, Jeff, I just want to add one thing. I mean, we've gotten some feedback from customers that, especially for customers that are running on a competitor solution, especially for certificate management, where the preference is for them to put some of this infrastructure in the DMZ. But they don't want to have these things domain joined, and both us and our competitors require these endpoint, these kind of proxy connector things to be domain joined. But one thing that we've done working with customers, so the NDES box and the web server sits within your corporate environment, but on your DMZ, either you have a hardware load balancer like an F5 reverse proxy, or you can use the web application proxy that ships in Windows Server 2012 R2 to actually front-end those connections and authenticate those connections, so you're not directly exposing the NDES box and the domain join box to the world. So I mean, there are ways of kind of architecting around, and still stay, compliant with your security policies. And the other thing that I'll mention too is, I mean, we're calling it Azure AD here, and people are beating it in our heads to kind of call it Azure AD. The legacy tool has been called DirSync, and I think a lot of our documentation probably online still refers to it as DirSync. So if you guys have seen it referred to as DirSync or have even deployed using DirSync, DirSync is still supported. At some point, Azure Active Directory sync tool will actually take over, and more development in the future will be in there. So right now, I mean, if you have it deployed or you're working with it, even if you're not doing it for Intune but for Office 365 or for other things, it hasn't been deprecated yet. But that's one of the reasons why we're kind of referring to it, because this is where the future is going to be in terms of directory synchronization while on-prem.
Okay.
So
great. Can you click for me?
I'm clicking.
I'm not even going to carry this around anymore. Okay. We came up with this itinerary back, I think it was about a year and a half ago, when we were planning to do a workshop, a technical one-day workshop for the hybrid model. So we created all the content, went to, I think, 4 or 5 cities, and this was actually the agenda that we covered in one day, and we thought, this flows pretty nicely. Let's go ahead and try it on site. So what we do is, we do 3 days. We have a team of 2 people, and on day 1, we kick off. Of course, we have some pre-meetings before that, but somebody could have nothing, and we would go in, work with them, create the subscription, run through enabling the platforms, showing enrollment, doing app deployment, doing all the policies and profiles, and then finishing up and managing reporting. We don't touch any of the keys. We're basically saying, okay, you do this, and you do that, and then we even ask them questions, which they don't like sometimes. And after they're done, they really understand what's going on, right? And they're doing this work for real. You know, they're going to be using this. Now, you might have noticed on day 1 and day 2, there's 2 work streams. Well, since there's 2 people from the engineering team, we want to make sure we're very efficient. If there are infrastructure, on-prem infrastructure things that we need to do, one of us will be working on the Intune stream and the other would be working on, let's say, SCEP or Exchange Connector. The other thing I'll just point out on this itinerary is that you notice that after device enrollment and self-service portal, we do app delivery. Why would we do app delivery? Why wouldn't we do policy settings or profiles after that, right? It kind of sounds logical. The reason is, if I have Eric working on the SCEP stuff on day 1, and Eric's like, yeah, we're going to need a little bit more time, you know, for that. So we put the profiles and the settings on day 2 to ensure that we have enough time to make sure that we go through the infrastructure and it works. Because every organization's different, right?
Oh, yeah.
The only other thing I would mention through this is on day 3, we have a little buffer to go through if we need it. But we review, again, use case scenarios. You told us this, or you're thinking this, and believe it or not, after spending 2 days with customers, sometimes they go, you know what, we would like to change this a little bit. And then the other thing that we do is we talk to them about the specific rollout in terms of enrollment with their organization. Who are you going to be rolling it out to? Like, who specifically? Where are they? What devices do they have? What services are you providing? And then after that, we have, a week or bi-weekly meeting with them. Now, for you guys taking a look at this, you could utilize this itinerary for yourself. If you just have one person or maybe you have a team of folks, you could stretch it out. It could be a few days or it could be a few weeks, depending on how you want. But it really does go through all of those different elements.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing too I'll add here is, I mean, it looks like an itinerary, but we're building on core functionality as the days progress. You know, we're doing the enrollment, we're enabling the platforms, so there's things that we have to actually get done in order to build upon that and enable all the other scenarios. So I mean, there is some logic to this. I know it's kind of an eye chart, and I see a bunch of you guys, trying to take pictures. All of this material is included in the deck. We don't strip anything out. If anything, we're probably going to add some more stuff to the appendix just to kind of, share the knowledge with you guys. I will say another thing too is, like, even when these engagements are over, whether it's Microsoft doing it or you guys doing it or you having a partner or being a partner working with a customer, we've done a better job now of also creating collateral for your operations teams and even the end users. You guys go through all this work and set up an MDM solution and everything's great, we can manage devices, and then users get some mail saying, I can't access my mail, I got to enroll. And what does this mean? So we've created templates too that you could customize for your environment, put your corporate logo on it, and it goes through the steps of why you're doing this and how the end user's doing it. And I mean, it sounds like a silly thing, but it's one of those things that you don't want users to kind of push back, and it's just another kind of extra thing that we see as being valuable. Not it's not a technical thing, it's more of a learnings thing, and it's not even a learning thing for IT pros, it's for the end user community that's going to get their devices managed. So I mean, there's a bunch of collateral that we have. I don't think we've done a really good job of making all of this stuff available and easy to surface, and I think we're going to probably do a much better job in the future of having a centralized repository of where you can go, or here's the reference architecture for building an MDM solution, and here's all the prerequisites you use. I mean, actually internally we're building some of this now, but so you guys in the future could say, hey, Eric and Jeff's prerequisite, what's the reference architecture to that? And the deployment guides, the troubleshooting guides, the templates that you need for your operations teams and your end users. So we're gonna, we're thinking about this, and we've heard the feedback, and we're gonna do a better job of bundling this together instead of it sitting in a TechNet article here, sitting in a blog post over there.
All right. So these are the 5 areas that we're going to be running through. As I mentioned, it's really aligned with everything we've been talking about today. So let's go ahead and talk about the starting out here. Very quickly on the Intune subscription provisioning and setup. Some of the things, you may have nothing. And then in that case, what do you want to do? Do you want to create a trial and then make that into a production environment? You might have something already. You might have actually purchased DMM as an example. Do you have O365? Do you want to tie O365 and Intune together, which most organizations would do? We already talked about AD enough today. The last point, very, very important. There's something called setting the management authority. Remember we talked about 2 deployment options with Intune, Configuration Manager and Standalone? When we are working with organizations, of course, we talk through that a little bit. You should also think about what are you actually going to deploy, what will meet your needs before you actually start the proof of concept or the pilot. Because once you set the management authority for either Intune Standalone or for hybrid, which is actually you set that in the Management Console config man, it's permanent. Yes, it's permanent. So sometimes we get calls. We can't do this, or we changed our mind. So think about that. Are you going to do standalone? Great. And I'll show you where you make that setting. If you're doing hybrid, you make the change in config man. All right, so let's go ahead and switch. Can you switch me over?
All right, you are live.
So we're going to say that you guys have nothing, right? You come to us, we're working with you, like we want to do an Intune proof of concept or an Intune pilot. And the very first thing we would do with you after the kickoff meeting is we would bring you to this page. This is just the Microsoft Intune main page. And you might notice that on this main page is a try now. Does everybody see that try now? Is it pretty clear where that is? So if you click on that try now, you get a sign-up form. Remember I asked you about if you have an O365 account, that question, and do you want to tie it together? If you don't, then you would go ahead and fill out that form. And part of the form, all the way down in the bottom, is actually choosing a domain name here. But if you want to tie in your O365 environment together, you would click on Sign On and provide your global admin account for O365, and then that would tie in Intune. So Intune would be a tenant into Azure AD, just like O365 is. And that work that you might have already done with ADFS and directory synchronization and so forth would all be there. Now, once you're done with this form, whether you sign in or whether you fill out the form, the next place that you would be then presented would be here. This is the Intune account portal, and the Intune account portal is for managing domains and users and security groups and licensing. It just brings you right into this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you that you see that there's 2 domains there. The ralphmill.onmicrosoft.com is, I chose Ralph Mill when I was filling out that form, so by default, I have that domain and that suffix, the on Microsoft, which you probably have seen. I also added, I have a public verifiable domain, ralphmill.com, and I added that within this console too. So I have 2 domains that, those suffixes that actually users could use. Now, if I go in and take a look at my users, I have to log in here.
While Jeff is doing that, if you have an Office 365 tenant already up and running, a lot of the stuff will be pre-populated because we'll know that you have these domains, you'll have these users, and you can import. You can hook Intune into that.
So this Jeff BU is the default admin when I created my subscription. I wanted to show you something on that. You notice that this role assignment is automatically designated as I'm a global admin. So that very first user that you create is a global admin that you can do administration. Now, a regular user, if I go back to users, you also will notice that these are all manual users. They're not synchronized with on-prem AD. I created those in Azure AD. They have that little profile next to it. One of the things that we find, they go ahead and they create the trial, they create some users, they try to enroll, they can't enroll. Why? What do you think it is? They didn't assign a license. You have to assign a license. Now, if your license is an Intune license, you would be doing it through this tool, this account portal, and I'll show you. I'll pick on my mom. I actually have my entire family in this directory, by the way, provide support for them. I just click on the Intune, Microsoft Intune, and they have a license. If you have EMM, you'd be doing that through the Azure admin portal. And then, so you have that. You add the trial through the main web page. You're brought here. You may add a domain. You may add some users. You assign some licenses. Are we ready to go yet? We're not quite ready to go because we're going to go over to the other administrative portal in Intune, and this is the admin portal. This is the portal for Intune, standalone, where you do all your day-to-day management and operations. This is really where you live. You don't live in an account portal, or you shouldn't. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is, you see that we have workspaces over on the left. I have clicked on the admin workspace. I have clicked on mobile device management. Remember that mobile device management authority thing that I said on the slide ago? That's very, very important. I made a decision that I'm going to use Intune standalone, and I have selected that. When you make that selection, what happens is all of those devices then show up. So you know how you're seeing Windows and Windows Phone and iOS and all this stuff? If you don't set the management authority first, you won't see anything. So that's another thing that we find. Hey, Jeff, I'm ready to go, but when I go into admin portal, I can't enable any devices. I don't see any devices, any device platforms. That's what you would do. So you would click on that. Now we're ready to go. We're ready to enable the platforms and do some enrollment. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you. And so let's go to the PowerPoint.
And then one thing I'll add to that too is, I mean, through the miracle of telemetry and even customer feedback, we have seen customers create a trial and even assign users, but stop at the the management assigning the management authority, because it's not clear what that entails. So I mean, we're working on some better documentation and better explanation of what that really means. I mean, Jeff mentioned earlier that once you set that it's a painful thing to change. It's not something that you, a customer, would be able to change. It really creates an operations ticket for our folks to actually go in, and it's not a kind of a we'll flip a switch and make you guys go back. There's a bunch of work that needs to get done. So that's why we encourage people to really think about whether you're doing hybrid or standalone. So now you have the Intune kind of tenant set up and running. You have all the platform enablement choices. So I'm sure you guys know we support iOS, Android, Windows, and Windows Phone.
Do we support BlackBerry?
We do not support BlackBerry.
Okay, just checking.
We do not support BlackBerry. Just to kind of add to that, one trend that we do see with a lot of customers who are actually on BlackBerry is a lot of these guys are using, because they're typically corporate-owned devices or company-owned devices, they're migrating a lot of their users to Windows phones. The Apple push notifications. So these are some of the things that I'll go over during the platform enablement.
All right.
Go back to. I'm actually going to use Jeff's tenant because my machine is not able to get on the internet. Oh,
there you go.
There we go. So so we're back at the same screen where we set the management authority, and you'll see here, you have to enable the platforms. One thing that I'll mention, Jeff kind of talked about it earlier in terms of Apple push notification and semantic certs that you need in order to use the platforms. So the Apple push notification is so we can send communication down to iOS devices. The semantic cert is code signing certificates. So you go through this exercise, and I'm not going to, for the sake of time today, I'm not actually going to go through that. But you would sit here and select, I want to, get the Apple push notification certificate. We would generate a certificate request. You would log into Apple, and then get that certificate for you. One thing that we see at companies all the time, and like I said, this is one of those things where it sounds silly, but it's not. A lot of companies do not want a single person's Apple ID to own that certificate. If somebody decides to leave the firm or they get fired, how are they going to renew that certificate? So there are usually central teams that manage those kinds of relationships where there's a company ID for Apple, or a company ID for Google Store, or a company ID for the Microsoft Store, or another entity. So we've been in situations where we've been on site and customers like, I can't do that because it's going to be under my ID. And you might see something similar in your environment. Even when all these certificates, getting a certificate from Symantec requires a credit card. Maybe you can't go through. You have to go through the purchase order. One other thing that I'll mention. This is actually very important. If you look here in the where we're doing the platform enablement, you'll see that the iOS is actually ready to. So you see here's the certificate, and there's where things were last So this is when Jeff put in his Apple Push Notification certificate. The service knows when the certificate was entered and when it actually expires. But we do not generate an alert to you to say, hey, by the way, in 2 weeks, your certificate's going to expire. And usually these certificates last a year. So what happens is somebody gets the service up and running, you guys have trained your teams, everything's working, and people forget about this. And a year goes by, certificates expire. The system currently today does not surface to you, hey, by the way, the countdown clock is coming, and they run into issues. So it's one of those things where even a simple calendar entry, just to kind of remind yourself or remind a team of people saying, we got to renew these certificates. It's just, it's not a technology thing, it's just a tip that we've seen customers kind of running into.
All right.
And I'll kind of, so here.
One other thing too, if you just scroll down underneath iOS very quickly, you notice that the device enrollment program is there.
Yep.
So we now support the device enrollment program. The process is very similar. You're doing a signing request, you're bringing it to the DEP portal at Apple, giving it to them, and then they're giving you a token back. And then you basically are adding the serial numbers and associate them with profiles on our side, so that when they go through the setup assistant, it just enrolls the device.
Are a lot of you guys using DEP today or interested in DEP today for iOS devices? Are all of you guys in North America? Okay. Because I think today currently it's limited to North America. That's some.
Do you want to talk about the company portal? Yep. I got it up now.
So here, so this is our company portal here. So when you're in a device is enrolled, you'll see the devices that are enrolled under your name. This is stuff that you can actually control within the portal here. You can upload your own customized version of the company portal with your own corporate logo, help desk, contact, email, all the featured apps, the published apps of the device. So here you can actually, this device. I can force the sync from here. I could reset the device or remove my device from management. So this is within the user's control, or even rename a device. Somebody might not want Julia's iPad. They might want the user's alias in the domain to so they can actually rename it.
Okay, great.
One other thing too, as I'll show. Oh, Chris, Jeff, if you can go back to your PC. Is the terms and conditions. So, this is another one of those things where, working with your human resources department or your compliance department and getting these terms and conditions, written and vetted and approved is something that, we're on customers don't want their employees enrolling devices unless the T&E is terms and conditions is done. Jeff will talk about it a little bit later, but we actually have a report too to confirm, who and when has an end user accepted the terms and condition as part of the enrollment.
Okay, great.
And the last thing I'll show here is just the enrollment rules. Our default setting is 5. You can make that larger or lower depending upon the number of devices that you expect your users to enroll. But the default for us is 5, and usually I think 5 is probably about average, even maybe a little bit more on the high side. Typically people have a personal device, a corporate device, and a PC.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to move on very quickly to policies, profiles, and conditional access. You can kind of think about this in 3 particular areas. So we have policy settings, which are device settings and security settings. We have profiles, and the whole concept of profiles is to make it very easy for the user to connect to corporate resources without having to actually enter in information. So email, Wi-Fi, VPN profile, and I'll be showing you that. And then we've talked about the ability to deploy certificates. So we have certificate profiles, conditional access to Exchange, both on-prem and online, and then also SharePoint online. So those are policies and compliance policies. So let's go ahead and take a look at all those. All right. So I have some, it's like the cooking show. I have some ones that I created, but I'm going to show you the process of how you actually create some of these. And the concept, if some of you are familiar with Configuration Manager, this process of adding or creating something and then deploying something and targeting users or groups, in Config Man it's collections, in Intune we just call them groups. So user groups, device groups. So this workspace again, we were in the admin workspace before. Now we're in the policy workspace at the configuration policy node, and if I click on Add, we'll have a wizard that will come up, and you notice that we have platforms designated. We have Android, we have iOS, we have Windows. Software is for the MAM policy. The computer management, of course, is for computer policies, traditional PC management. And then we have something called common mobile device settings. The common mobile device settings are settings for security and for device restrictions that apply across platform. So that's the first place that we're going to go. And we have two options to go ahead and create and deploy as recommended or do it custom. I'll do it custom. And we have a name and description, and then we have these different categories. So we have an area around security. These are common password settings that you guys probably do, whether you're doing it in Exchange or you're doing it in your own solution. So whether or not you're going to have a password, for instance, the type of password, the password length, the number of repeated sign-in failures, and the lock screen. So these are very, very common things. We also have additional areas in the cloud and email and applications and device settings. Now, one of the areas that I show people is I say instead of, let me go ahead and bring this up, instead of making your way through the UI admin portal looking at all the different settings and trying to figure out which ones am I going to use, I tell them go ahead and use this table. Align it to what your needs are and requirements. That way, when you're in the UI, you're able to go in and select the types of things that you want. All right, now I'm going to go back here and show you a device setting I already have. So I created this device setting. After I added device setting, I'm going to deploy it. How you deploy it is you select it and you click on Manage Deployment. And you notice that I have groups here that can be targeted. I have user groups and I have device groups. Here you can see I have a couple groups that I've targeted. I'm going to go ahead and add Demo 2. It's that easy. And I could click OK. It'll go ahead and then deploy those settings out to those devices that are targeted. And I can go ahead and remove it. So one question we get a lot of times is, you know, this UI has a lot of great settings. You guys have really improved. But is there a way for us to do some customization? Because I know that Windows Phone 8.1 has the ability to do some of these things, and I don't see it in the UI. I know that, hey, we use Configurator for iOS. Is there a way that we can take the Configurator profile and bring it up and actually deploy it? And the answer is yes. We have what we call custom policies that we can go ahead and leverage. So let me show you a couple examples of that. So the first thing that I'm going to do, so I'll scroll down here, and we have, I named it Windows Phone OMA URI policy example. If I go in here, I am using something called OMA URI, and it allows us to customize and reach out to settings that are in the phone that the phone supports that aren't necessarily in the UI.
Hey, Jeff, what is the OMA URI, and is it just a Windows thing?
No, it's not. So is this a trick question? Open Mobile Alliance Unified Uniform Resource Identifier.
Yeah.
They got it right? Okay, you guys I know all wanted to know that.
And this is,
it's kind of like a registration database on Windows, if you will. But more importantly, it's a way to really customize your settings on Windows Phone. Of course, if you're using Configurator, you can do the same thing for iOS. And just recently, we announced support, and actually it's enabled in the service, to do OMA URI extensions for Android. So let me just show you very quickly a couple things. So what does this look like? I'll go to this particular one, Disable Manual VPN Settings. If I click on Edit, you see that we give it a name. We have a data type. In this case, it's an integer because I'm saying 0 or 1, enable or disable. And then the OMA URI is this. This is the path. There is a document called the Windows Phone 8.1 MDM protocol document.
and all the other platform vendors have their protocol documentation available as well.
For Windows Phone, some of those settings that I'm talking about in that document, it starts on page 150. Now, let me show you on iOS what it looks like. So here I have a custom policy for iOS. And what I did for this is I imported a profile from Configurator. brought it right into the system, and deployed it out. Now remember, when we deploy, we're targeting, again, users and groups. So that's an example. And then we also have an example here, I think, for Android custom policy, but I won't even go into that right now. More importantly, here's something that's more interesting, though. So we have the ability to really lock down Windows Phone 8.1. You've heard of this capability called assigned access in Windows, right? We have that in Windows Phone 8.1. And so I'm going to show you just a very quick example of what that looks like. Can you make sure it's open there? So I have a OMA URI policy that I created. I have a path. I have some XML, right? So what I've done is a regular Windows Phone would have a lot of tiles on the start screen, right? I've basically designated what are the tiles that are going to show up on the start screen, and then on the menu, these are the only apps that are going to show up on the menu, and then go into settings. These are the only settings under system, and move over to applications too. So it's basically the ability for me to really lock it down. No, the user can't change it, and in some cases, organizations, because of security or particular use case scenarios, want to be able to do that. So I just wanted to show you that very quickly. Now, let me go ahead and move to another type of policy, and that policy is called conditional access, which you've heard probably throughout the entire event conference about this. It's really a great capability. So how difficult is it to set up conditional access for Exchange Online? It's very easy, but it's very powerful, so you never want to make sure, as I explain this, that your executives or your boss are in this particular group, right? So you got to be careful. I'm going to set up a policy for Exchange Online. So I click on the box. I then, go ahead and hit modify for me, Eric. I then go ahead and I add Active Directory security groups that I'm targeting. If I include somebody into a group and don't add anybody, go ahead and hit cancel there. Then I'm ready to go, but scroll down a little bit further. If there's particular groups that maybe cross over security groups, I can exempt them.
Or if you have nested groups, this is a way to kind of...
So go ahead to SharePoint for me, the SharePoint policy. How do you do it for SharePoint? Same thing. You identify, you click on it, you identify the AD security group, and then when you click on save, it does it. So what's the end user experience then over here? So I'll switch around here.
One thing I'll mention too while Jeff is getting the demo ready is that another reason, even if you're doing DirSync, when you were in the kind of domain and account portal, that's the first kind of portal you use before you're really in the admin portal of Intune. Even if you're doing DirSync and you're synchronizing users, you might want to create cloud-only users just for testing purposes only. This way you're not touching any live users. So you can set up DirSync, you can set up synchronization with your directory, but you might want to have a couple of test users, so especially while you're testing conditional access. This way you're not knocking out the wrong users, or if you want to just kind of test targeting instead of this way you can do a targeted rollout, targeted deployment, or a targeted proof of concept.
Okay. Remember I mentioned my mom is in my Azure Active Directory, and you notice I didn't have her in conditional access. I don't want to get in trouble, but I do have her phone here. And so I lied. I do have her in conditional access, actually. So this is, and I apologize for the resolution there, but this phone is not enrolled into Intune. But my mom thought that she would be smart, and she created her own account into our Bowler Enterprise Exchange environment. So Carol Bowler at ralphmill.com. So she thinks she's going to get email. But if we go back and we look at the email, she has an email that says, hey, you're not going to get email because you have to enroll. So if she clicks on the email and she says, oh, I need to enroll my device because Jeff wants me to, she'll then be brought to the company portal, and she'd either go to the store to download it, or if it's already there, she would open it, and she would go through the enrollment process, right? Then she would get access to email. Now, what about she loves OneDrive? And so, we have SharePoint, right, the conditional access. So what happens when we do OneDrive? So I go ahead and open that up. I sign in, and let me see how good a typer I am in front of all of you.
I mean, while Jeff is doing this, think of conditional access too as the kind of forcing function to get your users to give up a little bit of control of their devices and putting it under management. I mean, that's, if they care about email, and, most people do care about email or even OneDrive, SharePoint access, they'll say, you know what, I'm willing to give up and enroll my device, even though it's my device, for management, just so I can access corporate email. And that's really the kind of, instead of a big stick, using a carrot, saying, okay, hey, we're going to block access, but if you want access, you want mail, you have to enroll your device. And we didn't even get into the whole, MAM stuff yet as well.
So you notice for OneDrive, when she goes in there, same message. She needs to enroll. So many companies that I talk to, and I mentioned this earlier, they have this challenge. What's the carrot? How do you get people to enroll in a BYOD? And so that's a very quick example, and that's how you do it. So let's go ahead and move forward then, Eric, and talk about application delivery. Let me do this for you.
So we talked about the carrot and the big stick and how to get your kind of customers, your users enrolling their devices. So besides enrolling the device, now the device is under management. Like, what can I do with that? They've enrolled the device, and now they're using Office applications on the device. They're accessing corporate resources. They potentially could be saving these documents and data to these devices. What do I do about that? So one of the things that we've done in the product, besides being able to manage the devices and push applications and push configuration policies, we have something called MAM. So I'll talk a little bit about application delivery and spend a little bit more time with MAM.
Okay. Do you want to just go right in?
Yeah. So here you'll see all the apps that we have are currently installed in Intune, so we can actually deploy these apps.
You have OneDrive, why don't you could pull that up.
Yeah, I'll click on the OneDrive. So here's the OneDrive app that Jeff actually has installed on our devices. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom because we get this question all the time. How do you know if an application supports app policy, or MAM? You'll see here in the lower right corner, it says it supports app policy. So that way you know that if you have MAM policies enabled and you apply those MAM policies to the deployment when you push out the app, the application will inherit those MAM policies. So that's a good indicator of that you actually. So one thing to mention too is, the MAM stuff has been enabled over the last couple months. So if you had some of these Office apps in the Intune store, if you were running this in your environment, they might not have had the app policy. So you'd actually have to overwrite them and import the new one. And that's how you know that they support app policy. So here you see OneDrive for Android. This particular version does not.
Yeah, there you go.
So I'm going to go back up to the policies just for a second. So you see here, Jeff had the configuration policies. I'm not going to go through it. I think I want to make sure we have some time for questions at the end. But you see here's the MAM policies for iOS. I'll double click it. This is where we can do enforcement. We can restrict being able to take content off the device and save it to iCloud, or being able to cut and paste content between applications. Or you can say, you know what, I don't want you to cut and paste something from a managed app, but I'll allow you to say, from Word, I'll allow you to cut and paste it into Outlook, or say to PowerPoint. So you can disallow that. You can even do pin enforcement on the app itself. So say if you don't want to make your users upset and enforce a pin on the actual device itself, but you can actually enforce pin enforcement on the apps. So I can use my device as my personal device. If I want to have my kids want to play Minecraft on my device, I don't want to have to give them my pin. But they want to get into my Office apps that are under MAM policy. They can't unless they know my PIN. So there's a couple layers of enforcement that you can apply to these devices.
When do this policy that you created, when does that get linked to the application?
That's a very good question. I'll show you guys. Actually, I'll show Jeff because you guys
me,
probably know. So I'm gonna pick on OneDrive again. So here we got the OneDrive app, and you go down to the bottom. Yep, this thing supports app policy. So we're going to do a manage the deployment, and I'm going to just pick the demo 1 users, add them, and click next. And then if, this is how, if you want to make it available, I'm going to make it a required install. So you see here, the next section will be MAM policy. And then I can say, oh, yep, the Ignite MAM policy. Jeff has a number of MAM policies here enabled. This is where I tie in to the application deployment, which MAM policy that I want to apply. And then once I click next, it'll, I can add a VPN profile as well, and then do the deployment.
That's for per app VPN?
Per app VPN, that is correct. So I'm going to cancel it here as well.
Okay. So this thing, you deployed some apps down to this iPad?
I did. I'm going to show you guys.
Let's see what's on there.
Just so it kind of look. This is from the user's perspective, what the look and feel. So of course, not yet.
There you go.
Let's see. There we go. So this device actually has pin enforcement on the unlock screen as well. So I'm going to kind of go back to the main screen. So here you'll see we have the Office Productivity Suite. I'm going to open up Word. And you'll see here I have our top secret information on the next version of Intune here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, I'm sure you guys have seen this demo a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click this link here. I'm going to open up this link. And we have the policy to say, open this up in the managed browser. So this is not Safari, this is our net managed browser. And the managed browser itself has a whole bunch of policies you can apply to it as well, like don't allow these websites, allow these websites. And we're maturing what the browser actually can do. So here I'm going to go down and I'm going to highlight something. I'm going to copy it. And remember, this is the managed browser, and we have MAM policies applied on this device. So I'm going to go back to the main screen. I'm going to click Notes. I'm going to try to paste it, and you'll see the dialog box. There is no paste. So the MAM policies actually are enforced. It is not allowing me to paste it to a unmanaged app. So I'm going to go back now to, I'm going to use OneNote. I'm a OneNote guy. I like OneNote. So here's OneNote. I'm actually going to go through the paste, and you'll see here the dialog box is there. I can paste, and here's my picture of Chicago from the Ignite conference. So this is just an example, kind of a use case of the type of enforcement and policies that you can apply with MAM.
So this works for iOS?
This works for iOS, and this works for Android.
It also works for Android?
And yes, it does. It works for Android as well.
And could it work on their own apps?
It could work, it could work if you have your own custom apps. Say if you guys are developing your own line of business apps in-house, we have this thing called the App Wrapper. It's, you can, on iOS, you'll do it on OS 10 with Xcode. On Android, you'll need the Android development kit on a Windows machine or even a Linux machine, and you can wrap your app and put the wrapping technology around it. So you can actually have your own line of business apps and put the wrap around it and assign policies to that.
And
so
we have a SDK too.
An SDK too. Yep. That if you don't want to do the wrap and you want to integrate it directly into the application itself, that's another method. So we have the apps that we're publishing in the store. I think eventually you'll see some partners taking advantage of that as well. You have the ability to wrap existing apps today, and if you guys are building apps or revisiting building an app, you can integrate the SDK directly into the application too.
Now, if I went ahead and made that device not compliant and went to try to open up a managed app again, it would fail. It wouldn't allow me to launch it because the device isn't compliant. So that's an ability of tying the compliance policy to the apps, not just to its change in SharePoint. All right, so let's move forward. The last section we're going to cover is administration and reporting. Hopefully you've seen there's two administrative portals. We have the account portal that you use initially, and then we have the admin portal that you do your daily management in. Now I'm going to show you mobile device inventory. I'm also going to show you the ability to do some remote tasks. I'm going to show you how you do a selective wipe and full wipe, but do you all think I should do a full wipe of Eric's computer? You think I should do that? He's actually giving me a ride home, so I actually can't do that. And then I'll show you some device reports. So could you switch me over?
There we go.
All right, beautiful. Now, this is the admin portal that you've grown to love. I know you have. And we looked at these workspaces. So we've been in admin, we've been in policy, we've been in apps. I clicked on dashboard, and as you can see, this is showing the health of what's going on in my environment. If you click on notices, go ahead and click on notices. This is a really interesting area, and it kind of surprises us because customers are telling us, wow, I have insight into what's going on in my environment. So you can see on April 17th, we sent out a message that said, we're actually going to be doing a release update. And these are the things that we're going to do it. And there's also some messages that said, hey, we're doing some maintenance. So you have insight into what's actually going on. Now, go ahead and go back to the dashboard for me, Eric. The mobile OS section there, you see that we have 33 devices, and it classifies as a device. Just click on the 33 for me. So it's going to show us a listing of the devices. And click on Jeff's iPad, and click on, yeah, beautiful. All right, how about hardware? Let's see what type of hardware this is. So we collect all this hardware inventory. Let's see if there's any applications that are installed. There's some applications that are installed. How about policy? Let's see what policies are tied to this. And here you see the different policies that are associated. Now, there's different ways for looking at that, but that's a good example. Now, go ahead and click on all devices one more time for me. And pick Jeff's iPad. And click on, I'm sorry, go back one. Just highlight Jeff's iPad. And click on Remote Tasks. You see that we have the ability to do, hey, you're keeping up, all right. You can tell he does this for me all the time. We have ability to do a remote lock. So we have a special high-speed channel that will lock these devices. And then we have a passcode reset. Now, the passcode reset, the behavior is different. If it's on iOS, actually the user will provide something new. If it's on Android, Windows Phone, we actually provide the IT admin would provide them that. All right, so that's cool. Let's go ahead and lock Jeff's iPad. Go ahead and do a remote task and do a lock so they can see that real quick. And then you notice that we'll get a little thing that it's telling us that it's going to do that lock. All right, go ahead and click on Retire Wipe. When you click on Retire Wipe, sometimes this is confusing to users. Don't click that box, please. If you don't click on the box, it just does a selective wipe. That means anything that Intune deployed out, the settings, the applications, any search, it's going to get rid of it. If you click the box, it means that I'm going to spend some time trying to recover because he did a factory reset on my iPad, which I don't want you to do. I can't even believe that you checked the box. All right, go ahead and do no.
Typically, we check that box.
Yeah, come on, man.
We usually check that box when we go drinking with our manager, in case he loses his phone.
All right, let me show one more thing, then we'll take questions. All right, I'm going to go to reports. We have some built-in reports that are in the system. One report that's interesting is something that we call mobile device inventory report. So it has some filtering that we can do, selecting particular device groups, different platforms, whether it's jailbroken or not. But we also have the ability to save reports. And I built a special report just for you guys. And I'm going to view it. And this report's going to come up. So we have the ability for these reports to print the report and then also to export the report in HTML or CSV. So that gives you a view of the name, the operating system, the manufacturer, and there's a lot of other things that we can add. If I right-click on this, I can add a bunch of other things to the column, and then I can go ahead and report or export. There's one other report that's kind of interesting, and that is the terms and conditions report. I'll run that very quickly. Remember, we talked about creating a custom terms and conditions. The user would see that. They'd have to accept to be enrolled, and this is going to then show you a listing of that. Now, very quickly on troubleshooting. Customers will say, you know, I may be experiencing problems. Is your service running? You know, how do I know? Well, one way you can know is if you go into the admin workspace and you click on View Service Status, you would then get some information here. You also get identification of your instance, where your instance is. So that's valuable. Another thing that's valuable too, though, is the ability to get logs off of a device. So we have the ability to go ahead and get logs off a device. Let me go back to company portal here. So here I have the company portal. To get the log off the company portal, we did a lot of research into this. And we know that sometimes people are frustrated when they're having problems. So if you're frustrated, what do users usually do? They shake the device, right? And if you shake this device, you get then the log dialog that comes. How's that? I mean, we really did our work there, huh? You like it? Now, I'm not going to comment on the other platforms, so I'll just leave that out right now. All right, so let's go ahead. I'll turn it back over to Eric to wrap up.
So I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly. Like I mentioned, you know, we got a lot of resources on the internet. We're doing a lot of work to kind of improve where we locate this stuff and and really putting kind of rich material together. I think a lot of people want reference architectures, or at least, an end-to-end scenario. I mean, one thing I'll mention too is Intune. Intune is also sold as part of EMS. So, we're talking about a very small piece of the EMS suite portfolio, and people are thinking about, not just Intune, but their identity in RMS. If you guys, think that you'd want to work with our team on potentially a proof of concept, reach out to your account team and go through them. Our names are on the deck. Our names are on the, my name's eric.schroeder@microsoft.com. And
Jeff Bu.
so, if you guys have any questions, and you don't have to go, you want to kind of talk to us about something, or even potentially an opportunity, or even work with us just to kind of provide feedback directly to the product team, we're definitely more than willing to listen, and that's what makes our job enjoyable, is working with customers. So,
all right, well, thank you very much. We're still available for questions, so you can meet us out there. Thank you.
Thank you guys.